Hi folks, so in typical Mercury retrograde fashion, I tried to record this video 3 times yesterday and something or the other came up that prevented that, so I'm going to give it a shot today. And it is a Mercury in Scorpio video about the Mercury transit in Scorpio from October the 3rd of this year to December the 9th of this year. And of course we are pretty much smack dab in the middle of the retrograde cycle that Mercury has been experiencing here. So October 3rd to October 31st, Mercury was going direct. October 31st to November the 19th, or rather November the 20th, Mercury is retrograde, and November 20th to December the 9th, Mercury is direct in Scorpio, passing through one more time. Bear with me for the first couple of minutes if you are familiar with astrology, because I'm going to cover certain things related to Mercury retrograde that you probably are aware of, but then we'll get to the heart of the discussion here. First and foremost, I've talked about in a couple of previous videos, and I would encourage you to check those out because they set the stage for what is being referred to as Scorpio season, or the fall of Scorpio, or whatever it is. You know, the bottom line is that October the 3rd to January the 3rd, there is some sort of planetary presence in Scorpio, and it is an unusually long period of this kind of planetary presence in one sign. So we're all referring to this as the fall of Scorpio, wherever the sign of Scorpio is in your chart, and for themes that are ruled by or managed by, or what Scorpio stands for in our chart, there is a certain amount of focus and activity. Some of this focus and activity, I will say, involves going over past issues, past items, past projects. Some of these issues, themes, topics could be revisiting past items from October, November of last year, even early December of last year. But this time around, they're really here for some active decision making and maybe peacemaking or resolution making, except that this period of peacemaking and resolution making isn't really here yet, at present. I've also mentioned in previous videos that I see the Scorpio season as being divided into 3 parts. The first part from October the 3rd, when Mercury was the first planet to come into Scorpio, to let's say November the 1st, October the 3rd to November the 1st, when Venus, a planet that moved into Scorpio on October the 8th, moved out from Scorpio into Sagittarius. And Venus's presence in Scorpio meant that even though Mercury was in Scorpio and the Sun came into Scorpio on October the 22nd, 23rd, and we were having premonitions or a feeling that there were topics that would have to be re-examined or looked at or addressed or dealt with. There was a reluctance to do so, a passivity. That's the word I used in my Venus and Scorpio video. There was a reluctance to engage in the murky, messy work that the sign of Scorpio requires us to engage with. And the second phase that we're in right now is really defined by this Mercury retrograde from October 31st to November the 20th. And it's a time of going over things and observing, and the word that I am using and titling this video with is investigation, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a couple of minutes. The third and final phase of this, which is the most action-oriented phase of this, is from November the 19th to January the 3rd, when Mars, the planet that rules Scorpio, comes into Scorpio. So we are in phase 2, where with Venus's departure into Sagittarius, there is a desire perhaps to move towards greater independence with wherever it is that Scorpio is in your chart and whatever it is that Scorpio stands for. So it becomes important and helpful to know which house Scorpio occupies in your chart. For that, you need to know your chart, you need to understand it. And for people for whom I've created PowerPoint or Microsoft Word versions of your chart, take a look at those, because it's the house that Scorpio occupies that is experiencing all these transits. The sign of Scorpio, as I've mentioned before, really stands for relationship-related issues where we are deeply enmeshed with other people. These could be issues related to marriage or divorce, coming together or separating. These could be issues related to any relationships where there is a certain amount of intimacy, contracts, money being shared, commitments being made, and sometimes it's relationships that can even have a certain amount of codependency, a history, even some sort of an abuse or abuse patterns. Long-term enmeshments is a word that I have used. Intimate relationships sometimes, especially if they have a particular charge to them or complicated nature to them. And as I said, with all this activity in Scorpio, somewhere I really like, I said this again before, that the axis of Taurus and Scorpio for me is the axis of relationship. Our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to and with others, and the patterns that they involve, and the nexus between money and relationships, and monies that are held with other people, owed to or due to other people. Sometimes it can be organizations and institutions, taxes, inheritance, legacies, payments from other people, commissions, and sometimes, your partner's money, either money coming in from your partner, personal or professional, money owed to your partner, personal, professional, child support payments, alimony, stuff like that too. So there's a financial aspect to it, but the financial aspect is always in conversation with the relationship aspect of things. And ultimately, to me, when it comes to the sign of Scorpio and these enmeshments, there's somewhere invariably a conversation going on between either coming together more intimately with someone or separating from someone, kind of undoing the enmeshment, the entanglements. With Mercury being retrograde, first and foremost, it's worth knowing that, and this is where I'll do the sort of general Mercury retrograde spiel and we'll keep it brief. Mundane issues related to commuting or communication or technology, me having to do this video for the 4th time today, essentially, there's this feeling that things have to be done 2 or 3 times. There's also this idea and notion that things from the past have to be re-looked at and reviewed and re-thought through. It's not necessarily a time of moving forward. It's a time of looking at and re-looking at things that may be presented to you, or it's a time of going back and correcting mistakes. It's a time of re-examining decisions. And certainly with things like customer service and travel-related issues, or showing up at the airport at the wrong time and looking at your ticket and wondering how you could have made that mistake, and customer service interactions that are just out of left field, spending 45 minutes on the phone with someone and both parties are sort of talking to each other as if each party is growing serpents out of their hair, or I don't know why Medusa always favors in my videos. So whatever those kinds of unreal interactions are, sometimes people will say, or astrologers will say, there's a spiritual reason behind them. There's a call to slow down. I will say that, I'm not entirely sure. Sometimes this is just Mercury, the planet of commuting and transactions and communication, not at its optimal forward-moving speed, and it creates problems. And yes, if my travel plans are interrupted in such a way that I can put up my feet and read a book and give up and surrender to it, it may give me some time for reflection. But sometimes when there's a meeting planned and 10 people are on that meeting and you're chairing it and the technology breaks down at the last minute, or traffic is unusually slow so that as prepared as you are, you can't get to a meeting on time, I'm not sure about the spiritual benefit there. I will say that there could be a reason why interruptions are needed. For example, doing this video today, I can tell you that this video already is better than the 3 attempts that I did yesterday. So there may be something behind the delay, something behind the pause button, something behind the interruption that cosmic forces push to stop or stymie something temporarily. But it's not without its inconvenience, and it's not without its frustration. On a larger scale, we have Mercury, the planet of our mind, the planet of thinking, processing, cognition, short distance, regular commute travel, cars, vehicles, sometimes siblings, relatives, neighbors, interaction, learning, school, especially skill acquisition, writing, technology, email, text, communication, and trying to make sense of things, mental processing, cognition. That planet is backwards and going over certain degrees of our chart. I've already mentioned thematically there could be a link to October, November, December of last year. This time there's a call for action and a call for tackling certain things. And with Scorpio, at the very least, boundaries have to be looked at. At the very least. On a higher level somewhere, there's a call for greater emotional understanding of the people that we are dealing with. And as I said, the word for me with Mercury retrograde is investigate. And I like the word investigate because it has both an active component and a passive component. Once phase 1 of this Scorpio season was done on November the 1st and Venus moved out of here into Sagittarius, and we felt a call to put boundaries and to examine our relationships but move towards greater independence from those relationships that felt or have been feeling problematic. Then this phase 2 has kicked in with a phase that isn't necessarily active, but it's more active than it was. It could be that communications are occurring about wherever it is that Scorpio is in your chart or relationship enmeshments, but they have a curious active-passive thing going on. On the active side, it could be that you have made contact, or someone else has made contact or is making contact, and there's a communication element to it. But there's also this idea of investigation and watching things where you might be the one who pushes the first domino, but there's a whole chain of events that follows that in observing, I'll use that word, tells you more of what is going on than any facts that are being presented. There is, and people who've done readings with me recently will know that I've said this, there's something about this time period where when it comes to investigating being in relationship with others, the facts that are being presented, facts are not the truth. The facts and truth are somehow separated and dissociated. You have this Mercury retrograde, slightly pranksterish, slightly covering our ass, slightly gaslighty, well, maybe not slightly, maybe more gaslighty, kind of feeling of what is actually being said and presented. And there's the soul knowing that that is not the truth. And indeed, more of the truth is revealed in observing behavior and false communication than trusting what is actually being communicated or written. So there's both this active component that we're in all of a sudden since 1st of November, where we may be taking certain actions to examine or get clarity in certain relationships, all the kinds of relationships I talked about before, enmeshments, relationships where there's financial sharing of some kind of, close relationships, intimate relationships. And by intimate, I mean romantically intimate. But intimate, enmeshments, whoever it is, whether it is friends or family members or romantic, I think you get the picture. These are not casual relationships. There are power dynamics involved, perhaps, or sensitivities involved, or intimacy and vulnerability involved. And so with this idea of both since November the 1st somehow actively being involved in investigating or asking questions, or ultimately you will get to a place where boundaries and agreements will be set. We're just not here yet. That's the third phase, November 19th to January 3rd, really the month of December to some extent, where we'll have more support and more forward movement with some of these things. But there is right now an investigation of where you actively start to take certain steps, but what follows from it. And you may not even actively take a step intentionally. You may just be taking a step. You may be going somewhere. You may run into someone. You may run into something. And the facts as they're being presented and what is being communicated and what is being written and what is being spoken, the truth is really revealed in observing, investigating, quietly. Investigation has this active, I'm going to look at my magnifying glass and I'm going to go and interview people, I'm going to shake things up. There's some of that. But the investigation is also, I'm going to look at what is transpiring under a microscope. And so there is this unmasking that for all external actions that are being presented is not an unmasking. But somewhere inside you, the Scorpio part of you knows that there's an unmasking. There's an awareness that the truth is really being revealed by behavior, not by communication. And in typical Mercury retrograde fashion, there's a need to stand back and just watch. And more will be revealed by watching bizarre behavior. The truth about where relationships are at will be revealed more by observing, mentally investigating, emotionally investigating what the truth is about some intimate, enmeshed relationships. And the truth will not be revealed necessarily by what is being said or spoken or written. By the time Mercury goes direct on November the 20th and Mars enters Scorpio on November the 19th, and we move past Thanksgiving here in the States, things will take on a different flavor and a different edge. But ultimately, somewhere here is the question of where do boundaries need to be in relationships. We still have Mars in Libra, keeping the gloves on, frustratingly perhaps. We have Venus in Sagittarius that is really looking and contributing to this, looking at boundaries with regard to who am I and what works for me and what do I bring to the table and what do I take from the table. And so where do I stand in terms of my values while I'm looking at these enmeshed relationships and processing and thinking about what's going on and find that it's all illuminated. The new moon in Scorpio was on the 28th of October, and we're still very much, we barely made it to the 2-week mark of a 4-week cycle. So we still have another couple of weeks of this actual active lunar phase that we're in as well, in Scorpio. In a couple of days we have a full moon, and I'm avoiding all those conversations because future videos over the next couple of days will talk more about that. Let me see if there's anything else that I'm going to close by saying 2 things. Fundamentally, underneath it all is the theme of boundaries. And then there's also a deeper theme somewhere there about, I'm so sorry about this ambient noise, I don't know where it's coming from, and I'm going to keep plowing through. And somewhere also there's a need eventually to start to, the real magic will start to happen and peace will be made once there's a greater understanding of where all parties are emotionally with something, and a certain amount of compassion and understanding is introduced. I'm going to talk about this more in future videos, but I wanted to mention that. There's also something with Mercury and Scorpio. Mercury and Scorpio is immensely perceptive about other people's emotional needs and emotional behavior. That's where this remove, this investigation, this observation comes in with regard to what it is that is being seen and observed, and a recognition that what is being presented is not necessarily true. It can be a little sharp because it is Mercury in Scorpio, so you may find it is retrograde right now, but the third phase of